Welcome back to Round the Cauldron, where we talk theology, philosophy, and everyday life as a modern witch. Today, I have the pleasure of having Chris on the show from the YouTube channel Blood, Sweat, and Steel, and you can also find him on Instagram at by Hammer and by Anvil. And we are going to be discussing our experiences working with Brighid and how his experiences might be a little different than mine. If you're ready to hop into the show, grab some coffee, pull up a seat, and join me around the cauldron. Hello, Chris. Thank you for joining me here today. Would you like to go ahead and give a little bit of an introduction about yourself, who you are, what you do, whatever you want to talk about?
Sure. Thank you for having me here. Just really enjoy being here. I'm my name is Chris, and I am a hard polytheist Celtic pagan. I do work with Bridget and the Morrigan, but we're here to talk about Bridget. Um, and as a hobby, I'm a blacksmith, and that's how I work with her. And I'm a professional truck driver, so that takes me away from my hobby a lot. But when I am home, like now, I'm usually out in the shop.
That's really cool.
Thank you.
So, we are here to talk about Brighid. How did you find her, or how did she find you? Because I find that to be the case most often.
And I thought I found her. I was wrong. um, um, she found me long before I knew what pagan was. And the way I remember finding her, because there's actually two parts to the story, I remember finding her by about Samhain of 2016 or about. I, at this point, had been Christian by default for about, let's see, 2016, and I had just kind of stopped going to church around 2001. So that whole time, I just kind of consider myself Christian by default, but not really Christian. I was raised by my dad to be Episcopalian. He was actually the pastor, so I'm a preacher's kid. Episcopalians are pretty chill about things, so there wasn't a whole lot of bad mouthing about other religions. It was just they were focused on doing what they do.
Mm-hmm.
It never appealed to me. And when I joined the military, I just kind of stopped with the whole church thing and got out in 2007 and really just kind of went about my business with no mind to spirituality whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess you could call it apathetic. I
Right,
didn't,
like you sort of just didn't care.
yeah, I didn't know, I didn't care. It wasn't really on my radar.
Mm-hmm.
And um, in 2016, at this point, I had just discovered what YouTube was, and I hadn't really did much of a search. So people talk about, oh, you can't trust the YouTube because the algorithm.
Mm-hmm.
That's not a sign, and I agree. The only thing I ever watched was people playing video games on YouTube. Well, I dropped my remote, and Laura Daligan's video about Bridget came up. I
Hmm.
went, okay, she's neat, and I got curious about who this goddess was because I'd never known what paganism was.
Mm-hmm.
And then I learned that she's a goddess of fire. Well, that's cool. Usually they're gods, right? All the Greek myths say they're gods of fire. That's
Right.
neat. Wait, she's a blacksmith? Well, you're just breaking all the gender barriers, aren't you? Like, and I was a welder in the military
Mm-hmm.
and always had been. So working with iron and fire, there's really never been a point in my life where I haven't. And I had already been planning on taking up the hobby of blacksmithing. So that became a devotional hobby to her. And and I started noticing my attitude towards the LGBTQ um, that whole community
Mm-hmm.
slowly began to shift. I was kind of a piece of crap. Um, I was because of a breakup I had with somebody who decided they were gay,
Mm-hmm.
and that struck a chord with me. And so I'm ashamed of it, but at the same time, if it hadn't happened, I might not have found her. Uh,
Right.
her being Brighid,
Mm-hmm.
and she pulled me out of the alt right rabbit hole by the bootstraps, and really, she wasn't gentle.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, I actually spent a long period of time. Um, the results of things that happened after the breakup. I lost all interest in dating. I lost all interest in women. I didn't really want to be friends with women. I didn't want anything to do with it. It was a hard breakup, and it reminded me of the my dad's second wife, who did the same thing, but they remained friends because my dad has a much better attitude towards it than I did at the time. And I didn't want to be, I love my dad, but I don't want to be my dad.
Right.
And that really hit on a lot of shadows, and it opened up a lot of shadow wounds. And I actually spent about 6 to 7 years believing that I was asexual because everything shut down.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't want anything to do with any of it, any of the dating thing.
Mm-hmm.
And during that period, I kind of learned my lesson. I would never have done anything physically to anybody, but my attitude towards it sucked.
Mm-hmm.
And
You've grown though.
it's,
I think
yeah,
that's kind of
and
the point of it.
yeah, and the reason I grew is because I kind of got a taste of my own medicine.
Mm-hmm.
I believe that I was asexual. I came out to my family as asexual. This was accepted, but kind of like no one understood it. Nobody wanted to talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody wanted to pretend it didn't exist.
Yeah.
And I see that as a lesson from Bridget. She was giving me a taste of my own medicine.
Yeah. She is very, very not always gentle with the
No,
lessons.
well, no, and I, I, I deserved it. But at the same time, I'm glad it happened. I'm glad she did it that way because now I actually know a lot more about the asexual community,
Mm-hmm.
and I understand some of the terms I never really heard before. So,
Right.
having done research on it, I kind of understand it a little bit. Now I come to the understanding now that no, that's not actually true. I was just going through a state of depression.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I can't call it depression, that's a clinical term, but I was going through a state of some sort.
There's a term that I learned recently in a book that I'm reading called wintering. You are wintering.
Probably. I would call it that. Yeah, you can call it that. I kind of like that.
Kind of like a
That word.
period of stagnation and really deep reflection. It's not necessarily depression, but
Right.
it is very almost empty.
Well,
Um,
I didn't know at the time it was shadow work.
yeah, yeah.
She
So
she forced that on me.
yes, she's very big on the
Oh
shadow
yeah.
work. And with me, it was. I mean, I don't know why I didn't realize it at first, and I think I've talked about this before. Um, about starting to honor her and worship her and pray to her, and then all of a sudden like everything just got flipped upside down and
Oh
I'm
yeah.
starting like being confronted with all of these internal things that I didn't really recognize before. And I'm like, what the heck is going on? Add on to the fact that, we're in a pandemic and things are just generally
Yeah.
hard for people. But then I was in a conversation in a Discord community that I'm in, and I was talking about it. And someone was like, well, she's not a goddess of the forge for nothing. And I'm like, oh my God. Like it finally clicked in my head.
You can't shape steel without hitting
Yeah, basically.
it.
So Yeah, shadow work is definitely a very large aspect of my work with her.
Hmm.
Um, and so obviously shadow work is a very large aspect of your work with her too,
Oh yeah,
correct?
whether I want it to be or not.
Right. And so in my experience, um, she has a tendency to not be gentle, but it's more of, I guess I relate to it more as like a motherly tough love sort of thing. Like, we're going to do this thing because you need to do this thing, even if you don't want to. It's good for you and it's going to benefit you and you're going to grow from it. So, as someone with um, depression and anxiety and mental illness, I have found that sometimes it's like right in my face, yes, we're going to do this and we're going to work through this. But when I start to go through those periods of being depressed or just being low, she sort of like backs off. Like, she's still there and she's like, hey, this is still a thing that
Yeah.
we need to work on, but I know that I can't necessarily push you through it right now. So it's sort of like a, almost like a mom, but not in the coddling, cooing over the baby type of way, more of a like, you need to learn these lessons type of way.
Yeah, that sounds right for probably most everybody that really sees her shadow work side.
Hmm.
Um, because I'm ex-military, I see her more as a drill sergeant. They
Okay.
do have your best interest in mind.
Hmm.
You're not going to like how they do it.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I mean, I've never been in the military. My dad was in the Marines. So I guess I've heard stories of drill sergeants before, but
Mm.
I don't have any personal experience with it, so I can't speak to that.
She can be. She can't now. That being said, yes, she absolutely can be a gentle, kind, nurturing goddess. She has the capacity to do both equally well,
Hmm.
but she doesn't put up with your bullshit.
Yeah, no, for sure. And and what's interesting to me, and it's something that just popped into my head, is that she is um three aspects, or
Hmm.
depending on how you view her and the mythology, she is not one goddess, she is three.
Right.
Um, so I want to let people know too that are listening that depending on which aspect you see of Bridget, your experience is going to be different.
Oh yeah.
I know someone who works very closely with her who is a writer, and she writes books and she writes
Mm.
fiction. So the aspects of Bridget that I think she sees or experiences are more of the creative side. The
Poet. Yeah.
because yeah, the poet, the muse isn't the right word, but yeah, the poet.
Hmm.
Um,
Bard.
so yeah. So just throwing that out there for anybody that's listening or
Hmm.
watching, that there are different aspects to Brigid depending on how you see her, either one goddess with three aspects or as three sisters. Um, the mythology isn't entirely clear, I don't think.
It's not at all clear. It's really not.
It's clear as mud.
And she has more names than any other goddess that I know of in Celtic mythology, with the possible exception of the Morrigan.
Yeah, yeah. There's a lot. Um, so you said that you do blacksmithing as a devotion to her. Um,
Yes.
are there any other sort of ways that you work with her, or
Um,
let's define the term that you use, because sometimes I say work with, sometimes I say worship. I do pray to
I,
her. What terms do you use? How do you view that?
for my purposes, like within my own practice, worship and working with are one and the same.
Okay, okay, that's kind of how I view it as well.
Yeah. But I like now, I understand a lot of people, especially in the pagan community, they kind of shy away from the word worship
Hmm.
because of where a lot of us came from.
It's a
It
shadow.
has certain connotations. So I understand. I don't agree with that, but I
Mhm.
understand it.
Right. Yeah, that's actually something
Um,
I plan on talking about soon.
hmm. Yeah. Um, I would say I work with Bridget. She's usually the one I call to if I feel like I need help with any type of witchcraft that
Mhm.
I feel like I need to call on deity. I 9 times out of 10 will call on Bridget, unless it is something that is meant to be protective by means of concealment. Then I
Mhm.
would definitely call on the Morgan.
Okay. Do you have any sort of daily worship practice? Do you have candles
Um,
or anything that you're
oh,
comfortable sharing?
yeah, I do, but it's not standard because I live and work in a 18 wheeler.
Right.
So having an open flame in an 18 wheeler while you're going down the road, probably not a good idea.
Yeah, very much so. I'm
So
very familiar with the inside of those.
um, the so what I'd done instead is in 2016, my first in bulk, I pulled into a Walmart and I picked up a pack of pipe cleaners
Okay.
and I made her Bridges cross,
Bridget's Cross.
and that stays above the windshield right here. And there's a cubby hole above the windshield and visor on an 18 wheeler. You've seen inside when you probably know what I'm talking about.
My dad has driven truck for as long as I can remember. I used to go with him during the summers when I was out of school. I am very familiar with the inside of a semi.
That gets clipped above the windshield with
Okay.
one of those pins. And every morning and every night when I pull the brakes, I one of the devotions I do is I just kiss my hand to the Bridges cross and tell her thank you for getting me to where I'm going safely, or please watch over me or whatnot. And that's about as much as I can do because of the tight quarters in the rig.
Right. But I think that's still a
And,
beautiful practice.
thank you.
You're welcome. So, how did you end up taking up blacksmithing and using that as a devotional practice to Bridget?
Well, I started with witchcraft and had no idea where to start. So I decided to start using something I knew as a foundation. And what I know is steel.
Mm-hmm.
Because of my time in the military, I spent as a welder and ship fitter. I understand how steel works to some degree. So I started studying metallurgy, and I started just, I bought the forge, the anvil, the hammer, and some tongs, and I just started messing with it and screwing around with it. And of course, right around the time when I got to the point where I wanted to seek out a mentor, COVID hit. So it's been me um, torturing iron in order to see how it behaves under the hammer, because I don't have anybody to teach me.
Right.
I'd love to seek out a mentor, but we can't right now.
Right.
And I think maybe Bridget did that timing somewhat deliberately. She wanted me to figure out the basics. Or maybe it was just bad timing. I can't say for sure, but
Right. Yeah. We can never know for sure, but it is oh, there's a word I'm looking for. Uncanny, the
yeah,
timing.
that is a good word for it. That is a good word for it.
Because
So
like yeah.
I've been blacksmithing for about 2 years, and right around the time I go, okay, I'm starting to know enough to be dangerous. Maybe I should get a mentor. No, you're not.
Yeah. And I actually have a knife that you made
You
um,
do.
that is still going strong.
Oh,
It hasn't
good.
fallen apart like you were worried about because
Oh,
it was
good. The banana knife is
experimental.
still in one piece.
Yes, yes, it is. It's still going strong. I don't have it up here because it's
That's
currently
okay.
in the kitchen and I need to clean it. But um, yeah, no, I love it. I think it's a fantastic piece of work.
Good. I'm glad it actually works. And I was worried that the weird curve on that blade would like not let you cut anything.
Oh no,
So
it works.
because the blade I've had on before, I was much happier with, and then I overheated it in the quench, and it just shattered completely. I was like, oh, and it looked so good too.
It's
That
okay.
was entirely my fault, but
That's all right. The one I have works. And uh yeah, so you did that experiment with you used the plastic bags as I don't know the proper term, but you used the plastic bags to help make the handle, right?
yeah, they are the spacers
Yes, that's the right word.
in between the Purple Heart handle scales.
Yeah.
That's what kind of wood that is, by the way. And I had found online these little things are supposed to be like the Texas Star. I was like, yeah, no, that's a pentacle.
Every time I drive by houses with those on, I'm like, I see you.
You don't know what you're doing. Yeah, I go into Texas, and the first the first rest area there has a giant Texas star. I was like, yeah, you know what that is.
Yeah.
You don't know what that is, but I do. I think it's funny. And they're so right wing Christian. That's like if you knew what that was.
Yeah, very much so. Um, so I was thinking while I was getting all of this set up, um, do you view your job as a truck driver as part of a devotion to Brighid because
I
of her like like philanthropic background, not necessarily as a pagan goddess, but as a Catholic saint? Because I view them as
um
like one and the same.
I see them as the same. Yeah, I her stories of being a saint, I strongly suspect those are captured stories from being a pagan and they've been converted to her saint. So I take them in as information about Bridget.
Hmm.
I recognize and acknowledge that that is now a part of her mythos.
Hmm.
But I've also come across evidence that suggests that she has been worshipped as a goddess since the Neolithic Stone Age.
Right. Yeah.
So I don't really give the Catholics too much credit. They if she's sacred to them, great.
Hmm.
I'm not going to tell them they can't, honor her if they want to, but I don't believe she's a saint. I see her as a triple goddess personally, but there are others who would disagree, and that's fine. I'm
Hmm.
not here to tell anybody what what to believe.
Right.
So, and as for my trucking, I loathe and despise the trucking industry. It is a means of putting money away so that I can start my own business as a professional blacksmith, and
Yeah.
that's all it is to me.
Okay. That makes sense.
But
I have seen the goods and the bads of the trucking industry, and most of the time it's the bads. But I also do recognize that it's a vital industry
yeah, and there's
for
guys out
the
there who would
country.
never do. There's guys out there who wouldn't do anything else,
Yeah.
and good on them. They can have it. I don't want it anymore, but I have to do it for a couple more years until I can get a startup business going.
Well, that's good. So we were talking before we started recording about male pagans, and I believe that you might have a different experience, I guess, working with Brighid or finding Brighid because, I am a woman and most of the content creators around paganism online in the Celtic sphere are
Oh
women.
yeah,
So,
especially within the Celtic sphere.
yeah, I mean, I can't speak with like heathenry because I typically see men as the face of heathenry.
Yeah,
Um, do you have any sort of different experience or anything that you might think is different between being seen as someone who worships Brighid as a woman versus anybody who worships Brighid as a man?
I I haven't been publicly like in person around paganism. I've never actually been able to go to a pagan festival
Hmm.
or a pagan pride or anything like that. I would
Right.
love to, but like right now we can't. Um, as soon as we're able to, I'm going to. I don't have a whole lot of experience in person. All of my experience with the pagan community is online.
Hmm.
And online, the primary difference is that people who want to engage in the aesthetics of it, because that's a legitimate part of a witchcraft practice. If you use, say, glamour magic as part of your practice, that's legitimate.
Right.
There's not a whole lot of options for straight men in that field. Um, while the pagan community probably wouldn't judge somebody if they wanted to put on if he wanted to put on mascara, that doesn't really appeal to me or a lot of other straight guys because it's just not something we really want to do.
Right.
Not because I think it's unmanly, but because I
You're
don't
just,
care.
yeah, you're just
Yeah,
not interested.
right. If somebody wants to wear mascara or eyeliner, and he's even if he's straight or he could be whatever, I don't care. Fine, go ahead.
Hmm.
This is America. You can do what you damn well please.
Hmm.
In theory,
In theory,
you know,
yeah.
yeah, like on paper, you can do what you damn well please.
Right.
If you're in, Southern Alabama, maybe don't.
Yeah.
But well, certain places around the country would not care at all. So others would care a lot.
Right.
There's definitely been some hesitation because they don't trust my motivations because
Okay.
I'm a straight male,
Hmm.
and maybe I'm one of these you know creepy guys that people warn them about. And the reason they left Christianity is because it's more women centered,
Okay.
and they don't want to deal with the patriarchy. This happened a lot with people who are very much um, have gone to the most ridiculous extreme with the feminism within paganism,
Okay. That makes
and that
sense.
is not very common. Like
Right.
for the vast most part, it's been fairly welcoming. Um, but I have had dealt with the issue of people not believing I'm a witch
Hmm. Because of your
because I'm a male. Yeah.
presentation, because you're a man.
Yep.
Huh.
Um, I ignore them.
That's good. I would
I
ignore
mean,
them too.
yeah. Um, if if you're gonna be that way, fine. Um,
My
but
whole
for the
reason
most
for go ahead.
part, for the vast majority of people are actually very welcoming,
That's really
and
good to hear.
more so within paganism than any other religion that I've experienced.
Good. Good. My whole reasoning, I guess, for exploring that line of thought is
Mhm.
because I wanted to make sure that everyone listening or watching knows that Bridget is not, she does not discriminate.
Oh no.
And and we are welcoming, I guess, in the pagan community as long as you are welcoming as well, you know? So I wanted to make sure that there were no perceived barriers there for anyone else listening. I know that in the community there are some people, um, some communities, some traditions who are very staunchly anti male. But
Mm,
like you said, it is not the majority.
right.
And it's something that I think we need to work on. But that is an entirely different topic.
That's a whole other ball of wax.
Yes.
Yeah, and
Yes.
it does exist, and there is the occasional, and I have to stress that it does not happen often,
Right.
but there is the occasional turning their nose up because I'm male.
Hmm.
Um, but I mean,
That just blows my mind.
Instagram is kind of a dumping ground for that kind of nonsense.
Yeah.
So um, on YouTube, like my channel, the people that do watch, they've always left very lovely comments, and it's never been anything negative. In fact, it was always very, very nice. And on Facebook and by and large, Instagram, very, very welcoming and polite, but also kind of not really believing that I'm a witch, but maybe I'm pagan. It's really weird.
Those are two different things.
The- yeah, like you can be both one, the other, or neither. It doesn't
Right.
really matter. It's just very strange. Like, oh well, he's definitely a pagan, but I don't know if he's a witch. Like, okay, I'm gonna go back and keep doing what I do.
Right.
And
Let me
oh
just
well,
crawl
the
back in
other
my
thing is,
hole.
yeah, I'm gonna go back to the anvil and do my thing. And that's the other thing is people don't see. I see blacksmithing and witchcraft as one and the same. So I
How
consider
so?
smithcraft and witchcraft. You are taking one thing. Okay, you're taking this
Hmm.
and you are turning it into this.
Okay. Can you describe
That
what
is
that
a
is for the people listening to the podcast?
okay. This is a blank for a knife. It's going to be um, sort of a kitchen knife.
Mm-hmm.
It started off as something like this, which is a square piece of stock steel.
Okay.
When you work with steel, this high carbon steel, um, what you're physically doing is you are changing it from one material into another.
Mm-hmm.
It is starting off in an annealed state, which is as soft as it can get.
Okay.
And it's steel, so soft is relative.
Right.
But you are then using heat from the forge and skill up the anvil to not completely change not only its physical shape and appearance, but you're also changing it on a microscopic level.
Okay.
Once you've physically shaped it, the next step is a heat treat, or that's when you bring it up to critical temperature and you dunk it in either water or oil. And what that does is that actually physically changes the crystalline structure of the grain within inside the steel.
Okay.
And at that point, it is physically not the same material. It is still the same iron and carbon content, but the crystalline structure has changed.
Okay.
So, in my mind, that is a form of alchemy
Mm-hmm.
that it's it's a literal interpretation of an alchemical process, which is now people don't want to call it that. They want to call it metallurgy, which is a form of science. Well, all science came from metallurgy, from alchemy anyway, or at least in some form.
Right.
Um, Alchemy is a whole other ball of wax. But if there's nothing magical about the process of turning iron into a knife, or well, iron in itself is a shapeshifter because it can be shaped into literally any tool that you want,
Mm-hmm.
and it can be shaped into a array of different materials by adding different components, different metallurgical ingredients, and it goes from iron to a space aged modern steel if you do it right.
Okay.
And it has completely different properties and completely different um, characteristics,
Mm-hmm.
which is science, but I see it as a magical process when you're doing it at the forge.
Okay. I think I understand.
Right. I'm sorry if I'm not explaining it correctly. So
No, you're
I
okay.
all right.
Well, for me anyways, I mean, I don't know anything about what you're doing, but I can see like in my brain, I guess, what you're talking about. And I excuse me. I do know that steel is a combination of um, other things, and
Mm,
I just don't know the technicalities of it. But the way
right.
that you're explaining it, it makes sense to me.
Um,
So you kind of see that process of changing one thing into another as
yes.
the same as
Yeah.
the process of like casting a spell or practicing witchcraft. You're changing
Yes.
something to something else.
And you already know how to work steel a little bit if you know how to bake bread.
What do you mean?
So when you have a loaf of bread, when you have a loaf of bread dough,
Uh-huh.
and you flop it down on top of the cutting board,
Okay.
you have your rolling pin. If it's a ball of bread dough and you want it to be a long loaf, how would you use your rolling pin to
Well,
make it long?
you would flatten it out and go in specific directions.
Right. If you look at the anvil as your cutting board, the piece of steel as your bread dough, and your hammer as a rolling pin, you control how that steel is shaped in precisely the same manner as you would with a rolling pin and throw a dough of bread.
Interesting. I've never thought about it like that because I like to bake bread. Baking bread for me is a devotional act because
Mm-hmm.
Brighid is of the fire and the hearth. So,
Yes, yes, yes. Now you also already know why. You also know how to get the impurities out of steel. Why do you need bread? What is the function of it?
I don't know.
Like kneading. Okay, so it gets the air bubbles out of it.
Well, I think the reason I don't know is because a lot of the times I make gluten-free bread and the
Oh,
process is a little different. You don't
okay,
have to knead the dough typically.
okay. Well, when you knead the dough for non-gluten-free bread, you're working the air bubbles out. If I understand it correctly, I don't bake bread very often,
Mhm.
but you knead it, you get the air bubbles out, you fold it over, you get the air bubbles out. When you fold steel and you forge weld it together, if you're using a type of steel that needs to be forge welded, that needs to be folded, what that process is doing is when you flux it and you forge weld it, you're forcing all the impurities out.
My brain has just clicked to uh like a similarity between what you're describing and how Brighid works in my life.
Right. Me too.
Because she's like, okay, you're going to go through this. All right, you're done. All right, here we go. We're going to fold you over and you're going to do
Yes.
it again. And then we're going to do it again until you have
Yes.
yourself the way that you need to be.
And all those shadows are coming to the surface when you get when she fluxes the steel
Yeah.
and she forge welds it together. That flux picks up all the crud, and when you hit it with a hammer and it squirts out of the cracks, it takes all that impurities out with it.
The forge as an analogy for shadow work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like in my head at first, it made sense, but I hadn't quite connected it until you described it the way that you just described it. So, and I think even your analogy with the bread, for anybody that doesn't have any idea about uh, the forge and blacksmithing, I think that's a good analogy too. That's a
I
very
hope
good
so. I don't make much bread.
comparison, I think.
So
Well, I have made bread before that is not gluten free, and I do understand some of the mechanics of it.
mm.
Um, if Bex is watching this video from the Witch's Cookery, she can comment below and let us all know the point of kneading your dough. Because if I have questions
I
about
might
baking,
misunderstand it.
yeah, if I
I
have
might
questions about
misunderstand.
baking, that's who I ask.
I might misunderstand why you would need the bread dough, but if I understand it correctly, it's to get certain things out.
I think so, because you need the dough, then you set it somewhere warm and you let it rise, and then when it's done rising, you punch the dough, knead it some more, and let it rise again,
Mm-hmm.
and then you bake it. So it might be a similar process, but all of that going back to tying into shadow work, I think is just
Yep.
it's crazy to me.
And it even works with the bread analogy to a certain degree if I understand the process correctly, and I may not.
Yeah, that's okay. We can't know everything.
No. So
Um, So I know that you have the Bridget's Cross in your truck. Is there anything that you do when you're home that is not the forge? I know the forge is a very large part of your practice,
right.
but do you have anything similar for like when you wake up or when you go to bed, the same as when you're in your truck?
Honestly, no, because I'm not home for very long. I'm only home for 4 days out of the month.
Oh wow.
So yeah, oh yeah. So I'm when I'm home, I want to spend as much time as I can with her on the forge.
Mhm.
And but on Sabbaths, as long as it's not too freezing cold outside, I do like to have a bonfire and just have some incense and occasionally light a candle if I can't do the bonfire.
Okay.
But beyond that, no, because I'm working with what I know, and I've never had any type of like formal training within any type of Wiccan or witchcraft tradition.
Right, like
So I'm
no order, no grove, no coven.
right,
Oh,
none
we're
of
in the
that.
same boat.
Mm. So and a lot of what I do study has to do with steel and Celtic mythology.
Mhm. So
which
go ahead.
I still have a lot to learn about the Celtic mythology, but
It's a
that's,
lifelong process.
oh my gosh, yeah, it is.
Like I look at Laura O'Brien and Morgan Daimler and all of the information that they have, and
Yeah,
that's just from an Irish perspective.
yeah, and
And I'm
Courtney
like,
Weber, holy crap.
holy cow. And they're enmeshed in the culture because that's where they're from. Or at
Oh,
least
yeah.
Laura O'Brien is. I know Morgan Daimler, I think, was born in the States. I'm not sure.
Yeah,
Um,
I'm fairly certain Courtney Weber was too
yeah.
here in the US. And she's the one that wrote actually my favorite book about Bridget, entitled the same. So,
We'll have to leave a link in the description and the show notes for that. I'll leave a link to Morgan Daimler's book too, because I'm currently reading through that one.
mm,
Now, when you're in the forge and you are creating or whatever that you decide to do that day, do you have any like mantras? Do you say any prayers, or is it just sort of being mindful of
yes.
being out there?
Yes, when you draw out the steel and make when you stretch the steel out,
Mm-hmm.
rolling pin from the left to the right, um, I tend to go in threes, three strikes, and then I roll the steel 90 degrees.
Okay.
Maiden, mother, crone, flip, maiden, mother, crone, flip. And it's very simple and it's sort of like that.
Okay.
And I, without the anvil here, I can't really show you. And
Right.
there is no Wi-Fi at the forge.
No, that's okay. You don't
So
have to show us. Um, so you said maiden, mother, crone. Do you tie Brighid to those aspects? Because I know
I
not a lot of people do, and
I
I generally don't myself.
I do because in bulk, she seems to be a very seasonal goddess
Hmm.
for me. She's always around,
Right.
but like in bulk's coming up, holy crap, is she around?
Right.
Um, and it stays pretty strong. She stay like I feel her pretty strongly, well into like Samhain,
Hmm.
and then the Morgan time sort of takes over, but Bridget's still there.
Right.
And yeah, I don't not in, yes, in the sense that she has three aspects,
Hmm.
but also no, because I don't see her as necessarily aging. She always looks the same to me if I see her, and that's very rare.
Right.
But yeah, that's a hard question to answer because I know that she is associated with the Maiden Mother Crone aspects.
I don't think
I,
historically she is.
no,
I don't think so. I'll
maybe
I'll have
not.
to look. I
You
know
might be
that
right.
there are differences between being a triple goddess in a Celtic perspective and being a triple
Mhm.
goddess as far as most people see deities here
Nowadays,
in the States. I think
that's
it's
one.
very, very uh, Irish based because there are a lot of triple deities in Irish mythology. I'm not familiar with any other Celtic mythology because that's not really my like my focus. Um,
Okay.
but I know there are several triple deities, but it's
Mm.
not necessarily aspects of like the age cycle. I think that is very
That's very Wiccan.
Wiccan
Yeah,
centric.
that's very Wiccan.
Yeah,
And you know what? That might be where my confusion is because the first introduction I had to paganism was Wicca.
was Wicca, like
And
most of us, and we have to go through
stuck.
a process of unlearning.
Some things have gotten stuck.
Yeah.
Yep.
And there are some people, and I see this too because in at least Irish mythology, as far as I'm aware, there are the separation of like planes, I guess, like you have land, sea, and sky.
Yeah.
And a lot of people associate Bridget with those three planes. And I will have to find the link to someone explained it in a Facebook group, and I could not do it justice if I tried in the way that Brighid is tied to those three planes and that
Yeah.
she's very liminal, very in between
Oh, yeah.
things.
Yeah, she is.
And I I wonder if anyone else that works with Brighid, um, how they work with their crafts, because you have the forge, I have my fiber arts, like I
Yeah, you're knitting.
crochet, um, I can embroider, I sew, all kinds of what you would consider quote unquote domestic activities.
Yeah, but you know what? I couldn't do that to save my butt.
I bet you could
I
if you
would,
tried.
I'll bet you I get my fingers tied inside the weave. Or I'd sew the shirt to my pants or something.
That would be like I would be impressed if you did that. That would be
I,
tough.
I would not be able to do. Well, I don't have. There's a certain level of patience with that I don't think I'd
Yes.
be able to do it. And I've seen what you make. It is gorgeous.
Oh, well, thank you.
You really do. Yeah, you have a talent with it.
Thank you. I think Brighid tends to latch on to people who not only have a lot of shadows that need to be worked through,
Yeah.
because that is a big thing for her, but
Mm.
I don't know if the correlation is like people with shadows are creative or she just tends to go for both.
I don't know. I think well, she's a goddess of skill and not blacksmithing. I think is a metaphor, and I took it literally.
I
But it's
think it's quite a metaphor.
no. Well, she's literally the goddess of the forge,
Right.
but it can also be a metaphor for anybody that uses that has a skilled trade or skilled hobby that works with their hands
Yeah, that makes sense.
to
Because you
produce
take
something.
one thing and you change it to another.
Yeah,
And then you also have the metaphor of the forge for the person.
yeah. The forge is a metaphor for a lot of things that are almost all shadow work, but
Yeah.
and but she's also a warrior goddess, so
She's
she's
also a
not as
what?
a warrior goddess if I read it correctly.
Um, I'll have to look. It sounds familiar, but I'm
She's
not
not nearly
entirely
as well known
sure.
as other goddesses for it.
Do you know what story that's from?
Um, there is a story where she is described as wailing above the armies and flying above the armies, screaming and scaring them off. I cannot remember what story that's from.
Me neither. I'll have to look it up.
Okay.
If I can find the link for that, I'll put it in the description.
Yeah. I could be wrong too, but I'm by no means an expert.
Oh yeah, no,
So
neither am I. Like I don't ever claim expert status on this whatsoever.
no. Mm. It wasn't using her name that I'm used to, so it might have been a reference to a different goddess actually. I could be very wrong.
Okay. Well, that's okay. As long as, you know, if we could figure it out, I'll leave a link. But just anybody listening, know that could
Yeah,
be
I could be
incorrect.
completely off.
All right, so we're coming up. Oh, it looks like we've passed the 45-minute mark at
Oh,
least. Um, so we can start to wrap this up. I have one last question before
mhm.
we get into the outro. If you could tell people one thing about working with or honoring or worshiping Brighid, what would it be?
Um, if anybody ever tells you you can't because you're male or because you're not Irish or because you're black, Chinese, Japanese, whatever stupid excuse people want to gatekeep with, tell them to pound sand and ask Bridget because she is not going to discriminate.
Right.
She will tell you if she wants to work with you or not.
Oh
Um,
yeah, she will tell you.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
have
you will
had that
know.
experience.
You will know.
Yeah.
And if you're doing it wrong, you'll know.
Yeah. That's very good advice, I think. All right. So thank you so much, Chris, for joining me on today's
Thank you.
episode of the podcast and the YouTube channel.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I really enjoyed it. I appreciate you having me here.
Absolutely. I always enjoy speaking with other pagans and especially getting different perspectives on people who work with or worship Brighid as well, because it's very interesting how the UPG and the experiences can be similar but also very different.
Yeah, that's actually really true because they are similar, but they're also from very different points of view.
Right. Right. So do you want to let everybody know where they can find you on YouTube? Shout out your channel name and I'll leave a link in the description and in the show notes.
Sure. My YouTube channel is Blood, Sweat, and Steel, and my Instagram is by Hammer and by Anvil.
That's right. I said it wrong at the beginning, didn't I?
That's okay. No worries.
All right. Well, everybody go check out Chris's channel, follow him on YouTube and on Instagram, and check out his videos. And are you available for questions and chatting? And if anybody wants to share their experience with you?
Yeah, absolutely. If you want to talk to me on the Instagram, that'd be great. That'd be fine. If I don't get back to you, please forgive me. I'm probably rolling down the interstate.
We
So,
all have
but
lives.
I try to answer what I try to respond at least a little bit with the Instagram. So
That's good to know. Everybody, we will talk to you next time. Bye for now.
I
I'd like to give a shout out to my patrons over on Patreon. Thank you so much for all of your support. And if you'd like to join me over on Patreon, you can do that at patreon.com/roundthecauldron, where you can get patron exclusive perks and content. And I will talk to you soon.